With the looming threat of Putin using nuclear weapons against Ukraine and China's growing influence in the Pacific, immigration may play a role in Australia's position if international threats continue to move towards or even reach our borders. Given the current economic circumstances, what is your view on population growth and the impact it may have?
I'll start with you, Dan Tehan, because you've been quite vocal about this.
Well, I mean, the geostrategic and geopolitical climate that we're facing in the world, I think, is a matter that we have to prepare for. But I think when it comes to immigration, the big issue we're facing at the moment is to do with housing and the lack of planning that we have and we're undertaking when it comes to migration. We're about to have 1.6 million people come to this country over the next 5 years, and yet there is no planning about where they're going to be housed, what it's going to do to rents, the congestion that it's going to cause, the impact that it's going to have on the environment. And you need to plan your population along with your infrastructure and in particular your housing, and we're just not doing that. So I think if we need to start really addressing this issue and making sure that we're planning, and especially planning where people are going to live. You know, one of my great fears for young people is how are they going to be able to afford a house into the future? And we're seeing housing prices start to increase dramatically, and even now for students trying to pay the rents when they're trying to go to college or to try and get an apprenticeship, it's becoming more and more out of reach. And I think we've got to start getting the balance right, and I don't think we're doing that at the moment.
OK, but Malarndirri, I want to bring you in.
Sure.
Dan Tehan has argued in the past that this is, you know, basically a big Australia by stealth. Is that what it is?
Well, firstly, thank you, Rebecca, for the question. I think there's a couple of things there in that question. One is certainly Dan Tehan talks about a plan, but let's remember that when we came into government, there were 1 million visas that were still outstanding. And the National leader has said that one of their errors was not planning to remove the 1 million and make sure it was, you know, processed properly. So I think that's important when we talk about planning. In terms of housing, we know that we have the Housing Australia Future Fund sitting in the Parliament for months and months without the support of the coalition because we knew that we had to pass that bill in order to be able to plan for housing going into the future. So we're looking at 1.2 million houses now over the next 10 years as a part of that plan, but that only just passed in the last sittings of Parliament. So yes, you're right, we do need to plan, but let's remember that planning was not there previously to when we came into government.
Pia, I want to bring you in because the whole Looking for Alibrandi story is really the story of a young person dealing with identity and their migrant identity as well. And we're having this big debate around migration at the same time as we talk about being a proud immigrant country. Can we do this two things at once?
I think we can. I think it is important to talk about immigration numbers. That's just part of, you know, the government's role. But sometimes I do feel, you know, I'm a second-generation Australian, and sometimes I do feel like when these conversations start, there's always a sense of negativity, and it's sort of as in, you know, if it's not they're taking our jobs or they're going to take, you know, places away from university, or now it sort of feels like they're taking our housing. I think we can have a really great conversation about migration without making new Australians feel like they're sort of being blamed for something that, you know, really isn't anything to do with them.
Dan, is that the sort of risk of your idea that you kind of talk down migrant Australia when you talk like this?
No, this isn't about talking down migrant Australia. The contribution that migrant Australia has made to this nation is extraordinary. You know, and
you want to put the brakes on immigration.
But what we've got to, well, when you've got the senior chief economists like Shane Oliver saying that we need to put a pause on because we literally can't house the people that are forecast to come in, we've got to take that seriously, and that's what we're calling for, is for it to be planned. Malarndirri has talked about the Housing Future Fund, but that will provide 30,000 homes over 5 years.
Yep, that's 30,000 that you didn't support though, right?
No, because there are better ways that we can create extra housing and invest in extra housing rather than putting a fund in place, wait till you get the return on it, and then we see 30,000 homes built over 6 years. When there are 1.6 million people, that's what we're going to grow by over 5 years. And you've got senior economists saying we need to pause. So we do have to have a proper plan, and we've been saying now for well over 12 months, you need to plan for this. Otherwise, we've seen here in Victoria, some of the new suburbs that are going in, they've just cancelled the public infrastructure in terms of transport out to those suburbs. This isn't, you know, we want a better Australia, not a bigger Australia.
But isn't that a planning problem rather than a migration problem?
Well, it is a planning. It's a planning problem. It's planning for where you're going to house people, the impact it's going to have on rents, how you can make sure you've got the public infrastructure in place. All these things you've got to plan for. And there was nothing that we were told before the last election that there was going to be 1.6 million people coming over 5 years. And we haven't planned for it. And that's the problem, and that's what we need to do, and that's what we're calling for.
Noel Pearson, I want to bring you in. How do you view this big debate around the size of Australia as obviously, and we're going to get to some questions on this, but as we're at the same time having a discussion about Australia and history and First Nations Australians?
I hope that we don't go down the path of many other nations at the moment that are making politics out of immigration. That's my concern with the opposition's statements about this. We should abjure what the Americans have done with immigration and what's going on in Europe. We should have a balanced discussion. I understand both sides of the argument. We shouldn't make immigration a political football for the people who are coming to this country to make a contribution.
Wesley, is that the risk that we do need immigrants in this country? I mean, we're desperate for skilled workers, for instance. We have some massive shortages and we do need to bring people in still. That when you have this tension around infrastructure and housing, that there is a tension around it that leads to immigrants being blamed.
So I think we have to ask why we're bringing them in, and obviously looking for skilled workers is very, very important. We've got to look at what is the pipeline for them to get into the jobs that we're trying to fill, you know, and for some there's a lag while they're ineligible for welfare, while they're waiting to work. That might bring other pressures. But it's such an important thing. I think it was Jeffrey Blaney said that, you know, immigration is everybody's business. It affects all of us. It's a lot of people that are coming to Australia are going to have a significantly larger carbon footprint when they, you know, come into the Australian way of life. But there's a lot of industries that really like immigration. You know, retail, construction, property developers, they love it. So it's that balance. And I think all of this requires a very mature, very open national discourse.